Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Just for today, everything's okay.
Hi, everybody. This is part 2 to an episode. I don't know if you call it an episode when you break it into 3 parts, whether that's 3 episodes, but it's all on one subject. And part 1 is entitled The Purpose of Consciousness on This Earth. And I'm not there yet. That sounds very esoteric and sort of grandiose. And I'm not there yet. So I don't want to get into why I'm saying that, but just to do a brief recap of what I was talking through, I was sharing that I had this realization of a task or a challenge or a confusion or a blindness that has been a very distinct and very individual theme for my entire life. And this is something that I have not understood and I've struggled with, and I've felt enormous amounts of frustration, and it has created feelings of resentment and anger and rejection towards the world and towards human beings. But there's a blindness that's very distinct to me. And so I started by the first episode, or the first part of this, by talking through what I learned by watching my father, like a specific blindness that he had, given a certain intellectual and academic brilliance, and how condescending he could be, and that there was this huge disconnect because he would surround himself with people who were not of that, were not trying to achieve that, and that wasn't the value or the purpose of their lives. And then he would either get very angry and frustrated, or he would feel very gleeful as if he had won something, that he was so much more skilled in this one component. And I'd shared that that really bothered me, and I'd done everything that I could to avoid it, and then found that I'd reinvented it just simply in a different way. And my version was more subtle. My version was, since I was a little kid, I had a very deep and instinctive understanding of how often we inflict suffering on animals, on plants, on other people, on ourselves. And I had a very clear vision of what was suffering and what was needed to not inflict suffering. And I developed a feeling of superiority. And also, I still become very frustrated and angry that other people don't see that industrial production of meat. You don't need to be all liberal and woo-woo and protect the whales. Just factually, it is an infliction of a massive amount of misery, not to mention dirtiness, into the food supply. And there's no way for it to be okay. There just isn't. It inflicts an enormous amount of suffering. Boiling a lobster alive. No, we don't get to pretend that there's anything okay about that. You can do it. I'm not going to argue with you. And I shared with you some of the experiences I had where there was such a massive disconnect between me and the human race, because there were so many adults and leaders and people I even looked up to who would normalize or lie to themselves about real suffering and pain that they would inflict on other living beings. And some of those stories I'm not telling because those people don't deserve to have me sort of run them out there. Right? That's for them to work out. But I shared some stories that I could share without necessarily putting anybody on blast. And then I came to the point where I shared that part of my realization was beginning to realize that the fact is my frustration and anger with other people not seeing this thing that I see is the same blindness that I'm angry at them about. Me being angry and frustrated with them is a refusal to acknowledge that I am blind to my responsibility to be compassionate and understanding, and to see that they have brilliance and they have ways in which they're so much wiser than I am. I happen to have been born with a particular gift that it was never confusing to me. I was never confused when misery, suffering, or cruelty was being inflicted on any other living thing. That was never confusing to me. I violated it, but I always knew that I was violating it and doing something terrible. I've followed society. I've allowed people to, or I've chosen to follow what society said, oh, it's okay. But I knew it was wrong. Okay, so I had a particular talent and skill. They have particular talents and skills in areas in which I'm blind. And I shared the Vinnie Tolman story, which I find very interesting because he was dead for such a long duration of time and came back and had an after-death experience. But also he shared the lessons or principles, 10 principles he came back with. And the one that really tracked for me was when his guide told him you have to let go of bias and judgment. And he said, I have 2 adoptive sisters who are Korean that I spent my whole childhood protecting, I'm not biased. And his guide was like, well, how do you feel about people who are racist? I was like, well, I can't stand racist people. So you're judgmental and biased against racist people. You don't understand how or why they might, that's their blindness. And yes, it inflicts lots of pain, but that's their blindness, but you're also demonstrating your blindness. And so to enter into this part of the part 2, I'll share what he shares. And this is another reason why I really like Vinnie Tolman, because he's wiser than I am and he's had experiences that I haven't, but he's not super intellectual and hyperverbal. So I get to really connect to someone who can be a guide for me and can be a teacher to me, which teaches me some humility around the fact that, okay, I'm super verbal. I grew up my whole life reading fairly complex books, reading philosophy, thinking this way, talking this way, hearing my father talk, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so there's a skill there. It means jack nothing for the true value of you as a consciousness. I have abused that and condescended to people and hurt people and separated myself from people and hurt myself in that separation. And I shared that. So one thing that Vinnie Tolman shares, which again is like very simple and demonstrable, which I like his ability to do that, is he shared that the idea is, let's say you're pointing your finger at someone, these people, like these people. And he uses this example. He leaves the thumb up, right, for a reason. You might be aiming judgment at that person. And this is guide either validated or communicated this to him. You're also blaming God. You're the very source of your consciousness. The source of all consciousness and all reality, you're going like, you made something that's judgeable and I'm judging it, right? So you're judging God, you're judging the person, but 3 of your fingers are pointing back at you. When you judge, the person you truly imprison is you. And I know that that's a cliche, and I know that people have said that forever, and there have been sayings and homilies and whatever, but I'm trying to share it with you in a way, sharing my father's experiences. My experiences are very specific to me. This is the way in which I did it. I'm hoping that you seeing the very human way in which I was blind and in which I judged people, I'm hoping we begin to see the mechanism of it, why we do it and how we do it, and why there's no value whatsoever in hating hateful people or judging people who are judgmental. Even if you've elevated to the point where you're like, I know that judgment's not good. I know that hate is not good. I only hate the people who hate. You hate yourself. I'm trying to lay this out so that we can see that it's an actual mechanism for how this reality works. It's not some woo-woo meme that you post on Facebook or Instagram. It's actually how this works. It is as sure as gravity. Me sitting in judgment of my father was me doing exactly the same thing. I was given a talent. I seem to have had inborn a talent of recognizing suffering in all of its forms and never lying to myself about it. And all I did was inflict suffering on other people, because rather than allow myself to be who I am, That's something about me. It doesn't make me special, but it is particular to me and maybe a few other people. I then condescend to and put down other people, which only imprisons my gift and covers my gift. I didn't write articles. I didn't do this podcast when I was 25. I didn't begin really working to put love and compassion into the world until the last 15 years or so. So I buried that talent in my own judgment, because the judgment I aimed at them was a blindness to my own skill and talent. My judgment of someone who doesn't have the same particular skill and talent is a blindness to my own skill and talent, and means that I bury it. Like I watched my father. My father has an exceptional skill with certain types of intellect and certain types of processing. He was exceptional, and he did it his entire life, and really, had a stunning ability to see things from an unusual angle, as long as he was not emotionally involved, right? He could see things, but he spent most of his life just, rather than celebrating who he was and loving it and building something beautiful with it, he spent a large portion of his life just abusing the crap out of other people and being angry that they didn't have it, which meant that he didn't understand that it was special about him. So he didn't get to feel special, and he didn't get to express. And then I judged him. And then I woke up and went, oh, I'm doing the same thing, right? So the Vinnie Tolman thing is a beautiful, very concrete way of showing. You judge someone, you're rejecting another human being who has their own particular talents that you need to learn from, that you're blind to. So now you're limiting yourself in that way. You're judging the place from which all beings emanate and saying you made something that effed up and isn't worth being here. But what you're really doing is pointing three fingers back at yourself. In using judgment, you don't even recognize that you're judging yourself. My father didn't recognize that he was judging himself as just some average schmuck. He was so angry that people didn't see what he saw and knew what he knew and couldn't process information the way he did. But the reason he was angry is because he didn't recognize that he was special. Einstein knew he was special. He didn't go around being angry at other people who didn't understand E equals MC squared. Right? Kobe Bryant doesn't walk out to some playground, wouldn't have walked out to some playground and gotten pissed as someone like me who's remarkably bad at basketball. I don't mean just I didn't learn to play. I have never had the instinct for it, ever. I'm almost exceptionally bad at basketball. I can't even run down the court and dribble the ball. I'll lose it. And I'm 6'3", and that really pissed off a lot of coaches and people. Right? If you understand and accept with humility, I'm just one of all these people and everyone has these talents where they can reveal my blindnesses and they can help me with my blindnesses. And then you can accept, oh, I have something that's special about me that came with this personality and the brain that I inherited. It's a gift to me. I didn't build, I exploited it. I worked at it. Like, I'm proud of that, but I didn't put it there. Not that I know of. My father didn't put it there. Each of you didn't put it there, but it's what you have. But if you accept it with grace and humility, you then accept yourself. And in the accepting of yourself, you stop being frustrated that other people don't have your gift. There's the thing. If you stop judging, your open hand becomes your state of freedom while acknowledging everyone else's right to their state of freedom. freedom from judgment. I want to take a moment and read something shared by a friend, Dana Wells. I'm part of a spiritual / support / human group that has very serious intentions to augment love and connection and presence and to be a non-judgmental space. And it is remarkably, like, people really intend it. And it's a really beautiful place. Anyway, my friend Dana Wells shared this. I had forgotten, I thought she said it, but she had posted this, and it's a quote from Anne Truitt, 1921 to 2004. So I want to read this because in the end, all of this, what I think will be 3 parts of this sharing of my realization is really about judgment and what the actual anatomy of judgment it is. We all know that it's not good and it's bad and you shouldn't do it, right? But we don't understand really why. Like, no one really explains the very act of judgment cannot be enacted without imprisoning yourself, right? Like I was explaining. You cannot judge someone without simultaneously denying what's special about you that allows you to see something that someone else can't see. You don't just accept, oh, I was put here to see because I see something that other people don't see, and that means I can push the human race forward in very important, valuable ways that makes it more loving and beautiful for me and makes it more loving and beautiful for everyone else. But if I refuse to acknowledge that, then I get angry at other people that they don't see what I see, and then I judge them, which means that I am already in a prison of not seeing and knowing myself. I lack knowledge and acceptance of myself. That is the way in which judgment traps you. Let me read this. Anne Truitt, thank you, Dana Wells, for this sharing, this finding and sharing. Anne Truitt says, unless we are very, very careful, we doom each other by holding on to images of one another based on preconceptions that are in turn based on indifference to what is other than ourselves. Indifference. Judgment is an act of indifference to what's actually true about someone else. This indifference can be, in its extreme, a form of murder. I agree with the intensity of that. And seems to me a rather common phenomenon. We claim autonomy for ourselves and forget that in so doing, we can fall into the tyranny of defining other people as we would like them to be. I wanted my father to see the ethical and moral, with the ethical and moral clarity that I had. He wanted people to see with the scientific and engineering brilliance and insight that he saw. Right? We claim autonomy for ourselves and forget that in so doing we can fall into the tyranny of defining other people as we would like them to be. By focusing on what we choose to acknowledge in them, we impose an insidious control on them. And I would argue the insidious control is even more tightly on us. It's the 3 fingers pointing back at us. It's the control over me, myself. I notice that I have to pay careful attention in order to listen to others with an openness that allows them to be as they are or as they think themselves to be in their own spiritual development. Yeah? The shutters of my mind habitually flip open and click shut, and these little snaps form into patterns I arrange for myself. The opposite of this inattention is love. She doesn't repeat it. I'm going to repeat it. The opposite of this inattention is love, is the honoring of others in a way that grants them the grace of their own autonomy and allows mutual discovery. Anne Truitt, 1921 to 2004. Wiser people than me have said these things. Right? Anyone who gets a view on how this works for the human condition ends up saying the same thing. in a very general way, and I've stayed away from talking about judgment because I don't want to go into the conceptual. I want to start from the specific and concrete of my father's experiences and behaviors, my experiences and behaviors, and then to actually see from the inside out how this mechanism works. Why Vinnie Tolman's guide told him and gave him this image, right? You judge someone. Yes, you're imposing a limitation on them, but you're also judging and trying to limit God consciousness. Impossible. But the greatest amount of judgment and limitation is being placed on you. And it's not even actually being placed on you. It's only a reflection that it is already present. You already don't know. Your greatest blind spot is you don't know who you are. When you judge, your greatest blind spot is that you don't know who you are. My blindness is I've always had an extreme clarity in what discerning the difference between cruelty and suffering, unnecessary suffering, versus care, compassion, and love. I've never been confused. I was born that way, and my experience has only deepened it, right? When I judge people, I'm putting them in a box that works inside my head, but my judging of them only indicates that it never occurred to me that there's something very special and very important that I should be sharing and speaking with kindness and compassion and love, because other people have stunning brilliance and genius in areas that I'm blind and I need them. There's no way to truly spiritually or as a consciousness evolve without openness to the perspective and the beauty of others, because we have all been given talents within this reality. We've been given talents that are exceptional, and other people have been given talents that are exceptional. And it is only in the openness to others that our blindnesses are revealed and healed. And it is only with compassion, love, and respect that people can receive the talent that you have. Right? So this is about judgment, but no cliches. It's about literally getting into the anatomy of judgment. And I'm being a bit more conceptual in this middle segment, and in the last segment, I will really tell you specifically my confusion, my struggle, what has been. It's an act of judgment. It's a struggle with judgment. It's a struggle with a specific anatomy and a specific case of opposing forces and confusion, a very binary way of looking at things that I've been unable to escape my entire life until I finally realized, and this will sound like a cliche until I describe it, that love, compassion, and acceptance is the only way I can win free of this specific thing that is my specific theme of this life. I'm not super clear on what I'm saying here in the middle. I'm sort of summarizing the first segment before I get into the second segment. But what I'm saying is, as I began to have realizations, as my consciousness raised and I became aware, I began to see the truth of things. For example, there were many cases in which my father was just blindly cruel, like took pleasure in inflicting humiliation or emotional, psychological pain on me. And that made me want to judge him and then look for his weaknesses. And his weakness was a moral arrogance. And then I began to feel superior. And in attempting to win or attempting to equalize my experience with him, I became the same function and I did the same thing. And as this thing raises in my consciousness and begins to heal, and I begin to see things as they are, not as I want them to be, not as I built them in my head, not as the boxes that made life convenient for me or reassured my fears, I began to see that things that seemed impossibly cruel have served me, and I have learned from them. And I see evidence of this. Again, I mentioned when I read that quote from Dana Wells, well, Ann Truitt, but Dana was the one who turned me on to it. This is a group that I'm a part of. It's a support group. It's a spiritual advancement group. It's a sharing. It's a building of community. It's all of these things. Recently, in the men's version of it, I had a very enjoyable experience because I've always been able to recognize the brilliance of other people and I've enjoyed it at a distance. But if you put me in an intimate social environment with friends, family, whatever, the moment I saw someone's brilliance or beauty, I would immediately feel terribly inferior and I would struggle with how I felt and how badly I felt about myself. And I would struggle. And I didn't necessarily blame them. I merely felt that I had to go away and fix myself. I had to go away and fix, like, how do I stop feeling this way? When in fact, feeling that way was a confusion about who I really am. Other people being brilliant at their particular things doesn't mute my brilliance at what I think is my particular thing, which was a clarity around suffering and compassion since I was conscious. So I was sitting in the men's version of this group and I found myself sharing genuinely, like even feeling a little choked up and reflecting back to people what seemed so wonderful about them and what they contributed. And at the end of the group, I had the realization that, oh, wow, I just recognized brilliance and beauty and strength and power and intelligence and all these different people, and not once did I feel inferior. Here's objective evidence that I'm no longer doing that move where other people being good at something means I'm bad at something. It's like, no, other people are good at things and I'm good at things. So we're looking at the anatomy of judgment. And I think I'm going to save the last segment. I realized that this middle segment was a little bit conceptual and more abstract. It's sort of summarizing really what I was doing and what my intention was and what this is about and where it's going. And also I'm getting a little mentally fatigued. This is the second part of the segment and I've already been through some clients. So I'm going to close here and then I will come back to the third segment, which gets very specific about my particular challenge. And I think I need to think about how I present it because it's experiences of specific people that I have known my entire life, but most of those people are still alive. And I don't want to judge or be cruel towards anyone. So I need to learn how to think about it or talk about it in a way that's loving and respectful. All right, guys, that's all for now. I love you guys. I hope you have a wonderful day and I will see you next time. Take care.
Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.